Hi everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Season 10 of the Equip Project podcast. Jim, how have you been this week?
I am well, thank you. I went old school last night, Ollie, and watched a DVD.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you probably don't even own a DVD.
Oh, what is a DVD? I've not heard of that.
Well, you're talking to a man, as you know, who still uses an iPod.
Yeah, I mean, the fact you use an iPod, that should be, that should be investigated, analysed some way. There's something going on. What did you watch on your DVD player?
Well, it gets even more old school because I watched a film that was made in 1956.
Okay. Is that black and white, I presume?
Yes, yes, it was. And it's called The Man Who Never Was.
Okay. Sounds very Jim.
There was actually a remake of it released in 2021 called Operation Mincemeat. But anyway, I prefer the old version. The old Seth, he is better. But anyway, it's a true story from the Second World War. And as you know, that is a subject which I'm obsessed about. So by 1943, the Allies had knocked the Nazis out of North Africa, and they were preparing to come in to Europe and to invade Sicily. And German spies found out that the body of a British officer had washed ashore in Spain. He was Captain William Martin. And the Germans bribed the local officials, and they took photos of some top-secret papers found on Martin's body. And those papers revealed that the Allies were in fact going to strike Greece and Sardinia and not Sicily. So the Germans moved about 4 divisions out of Sicily and into Greece. But the whole thing was a deception. Captain William Martin never existed. The body was of a homeless man who had died after inadvertently eating poison. So the film is really about the construction of a man who never was. The British intelligence service created this elaborate backstory for him. So on the body there were theatre tickets and, a love letter from an imaginary girlfriend, receipts for a couple of shirts. And as I say, it was all a fiction. But after the war, a full military service was conducted at the Spanish graveyard where the man known as Martin had been buried. And I think that's why I find the story so moving. It's the idea of a man whose life had amounted to nothing, and yet in his death saved thousands and thousands of lives. But for years, no one knew. He was just a prop in a fictional story designed to deceive the enemy.
Yeah, that actually sounds very good, Jim. I might have to investigate that. And sounds like a really epic spy movie, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting you say that because this is true. The whole plan was devised by an MI6 agent called Ian Fleming, who went on to write the James Bond books.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. I was actually prompted to watch the film because I've been thinking about this episode of the podcast. So I will explain a somewhat tenuous link at the end of our conversation.
Fantastic. Oh, well, no, that's another little nugget for our Equip listeners. We always enjoy your random little facts about elephants and all sorts. But in this episode, Jim, we're going to kind of get into the meat of some of this season. We're going to start thinking about the arguments for the existence of God. And the first argument we're going to think about and consider is the argument from reason. So theists, like us, claim that our ability to reason provides evidence for God's existence. And at the end of our last episode, Jim, you said, and I'm quoting you here, it is irrational to say that only science gives us truth and everything else is opinion. We can use deductive and inductive logic to search for metaphysical truth. So this entire season rests on our ability to make rational arguments. And so we better make sure at the very start that we have confidence in our own rationality.
I guess right. Now, just to set everyone's expectations, this episode will not deliver a knockdown argument for God's existence. But I think it makes theism a lot more plausible than atheism, and that isn't a bad first step. I think it might be good, Ollie, if we try to structure this conversation into 3 segments. Okay, I want to address 3 questions. I want to ask, firstly, can we be confident that reason gets us to the truth of a matter? Okay, that's the first question. Then I want to ask, does our ability to reason tell us anything about reality? And then thirdly, is reason all we need to make judgments about God's existence?
Okay, so tell me a bit more about that first question. You asked, can we be confident that reason leads us to the truth of a matter? That seems like a bit of an unusual statement. We use reason every moment of the day. If I'm 200 miles from home and my fuel gauge says that I only have 20 miles left in the tank, I can conclude that I'm not going to get home unless I stop at the garage. Or we use reason when we do maths, in my case, very poorly, or when we're having to debate someone about politics or whatever else. And we always have confidence in the ability of reason to give us the truth of the matter.
That's right. But the question is why? Reason is vital because it leads us to truth. I mean, think about the equations we learned at school, F equals ma, for example. I mean, that simple piece of logic has been used in space travel, in the engineering of buildings, and lots of other aspects of daily life. We're confident that when we apply Newton's laws correctly, they will give us true results. But my question is, why are we so confident that reason leads us to truth? We have this amazing capacity called rationality. It's given us insights into the secrets of the universe. It's the basis of our legal system. It's the tool used by every scientist who has ever lived. It's the guide every sensible person uses to get through life. But why can we trust it? Now, to answer that question, we have to ask, how did we get it in the first place?
So your point is that if we want to understand why we can be so confident that reason leads us to the truth of a matter, then we need to understand the origin of reason itself.
That's right. Some listeners will have worked out that I'm about to make an argument that's associated with the philosopher of Alvin Plantinga. He examines the origin of reason within the context of naturalism and the theory of evolution. Now, to help us get into that argument, I'm going to start with a very silly illustration. So, the theory of evolution is often portrayed as a ladder, okay? At the bottom rung of the ladder, we find inanimate stuff like rocks and minerals. On the next rung, we find single-celled organisms or things like viruses. On the third rung, we find creepy crawlies. I mean, I speak as a biologist, obviously. And as we move to higher rungs, we get primates like gorillas and then humanoid creatures. Our ability to appreciate beauty might be a really high rung in the ladder. But the top rung is our ability to reason. So reason, like every other aspect of life, is, according to theory of evolution, the product of randomness. Naturalistic evolution cannot admit any sense of purpose or intentionality into its theory. So our ability to reason is ultimately, according to that theory, the product of randomness. Now, let's think about this ladder that we're standing on. Okay, how is it constructed? What holds it together? In terms of the visual metaphor, what are the sides of the ladder made of? Well, like any theory, the theory of evolution is a set of rational arguments. But the theory has just concluded that rationality itself is in fact the top rung of the ladder. And I don't need to tell you that a ladder with no sides but only rungs will collapse in an undignified heap. Now, that is a silly illustration of the problem, but it might help us. It's nothing more than a word picture, but it might help us get into Plantinga's argument.
Alvin Plantinga is recognized as one of the top philosophers in the world today, and this is perhaps his most famous argument. His tactic is to set up a scenario. He assumes that both evolution and naturalism are true. So we assume there is no God, there is nothing to reality apart from atoms and molecules, and we assume that everything we have and are is a result of unguided evolution. Based on that, how does his argument work?
Okay. He argues that if evolution and naturalism are both true, then we have reason to doubt the reliability of our cognitive faculties, like reasoning, memory, and perception.
And when you talk about the reliability of our cognitive faculties, you mean that our brains produce mostly true beliefs. Mm-hmm. But why, in the evolutionary scenario, should we doubt their ability to lead us to the truth?
Because evolution selects for traits that enhance survival and reproduction, not necessarily for beliefs that are true. If our beliefs don't need to be true to help us survive, then we can't trust them. And that includes our belief in naturalism itself. So Plantinga has created a self-defeating problem for the naturalist. Now that is an astonishing conclusion. It means that even if evolutionary naturalism is true, no one has any right to believe that it is true, because the theory has undercut our confidence in reason itself. It's such a big claim. I want to take a few examples of Plantinga's logic. So imagine some early humans formed a belief that red berries were magical gifts from the forest spirits that made them invincible. Okay. Now that false belief would lead to those early humans eagerly eating red berries, which happen to be nutritious and non-poisonous. And that gives them a survival advantage, because natural selection favours the behaviour, not the belief. Or let me think of another example. Some early humans formed the belief that bad smells are evil spirits trying to curse them. Right? So they avoid areas with foul odours, such as rotting carcasses or stagnant water. And that gives them a survival advantage. By steering clear of toxic environments, they survive even though their beliefs are false and wrong. The aversion behaviour is the trait that is selected.
Okay, but couldn't it be argued that true beliefs are more likely to help survival?
That seems intuitive, doesn't it? We might think that only true beliefs lead to adaptive behaviour. But Plantinga counters that claim by showing that false beliefs can be just as adaptive as true ones. And naturalism doesn't guarantee truth tracking. Because truth isn't directly tied to survival, the probability that our cognitive faculties produce mostly true beliefs is low or impossible to determine. But Plantinga has another counter I think is very clever. He says, even if we concede that evolution might fine-tune us for practical truths like fire burns or whatever, right? Why should we trust our cognitive faculties to be reliable in areas like metaphysics or theoretical physics, which aren't directly tied to survival? If reason only exists to help us fight, flee, feed, and reproduce, then why should we think of it as an instrument that leads to understanding quantum physics or philosophy? Or questions like, is naturalism true?
So Plantinga's conclusion is that if naturalism and evolution are true, then the probability that our brains produce mostly true beliefs is either low or impossible to determine. In either case, we cannot rely on reason to lead us to truth. Another objection might be that the theistic account of reason gives us no more confidence than the naturalistic evolutionary model. If Plantinga's skepticism is fair game for naturalism, it's fair game for theism too. Why should we trust our reasoning under any worldview? How would you answer that, Jim?
Yes, that's quite a usual pushback. But I don't think it works, because theism is based on the idea of a purposeful, rational, and omnipotent God who created us in his image. In Christian theology, this implies God designed us with faculties aimed at truth, since God is truth himself and he values knowledge. Unlike naturalism's blind evolution, theism provides a purpose-driven explanation for our minds. This purpose aligns survival and truth. God wouldn't design us to survive life using systematic falsehoods, as that would conflict with his rational nature. Now, if we take a step back from all this complexity for a moment, and let's look at the big picture. The big picture difference between theism and atheism emerges here. Theists say that the rational God who designed and made the universe is the same God who designed and made our minds. Our minds and reality fit together like a spanner and a bolt. But if there is no God, why on earth should we think that our cognitive faculties are able to discern the deep intellectual structures of reality? For the naturalist, our brain is no different from our pancreas. They both exist to help us to survive, and that's it.
Let's move on to the second of our three questions. Does our ability to reason tell us anything about reality?
This question takes us to an argument that was made by C.S. Lewis. Lewis actually anticipated Alvin Plantinga's argument against naturalism. But the two arguments are different, because Plantinga talks a lot about our cognitive faculties. He's looking at them, at the human brain, if you like, from an external perspective. But Lewis treats reason from within, from the inside. He asks us to consider, if you like, how it feels when we are reasoning. Feels is probably the wrong word, but you get my point. What is the experience of reasoning? How might we explain what is going on in our heads when we reason? So, anyway, that is C.S. Lewis's approach.
Okay, so can you help us understand that a bit then? How would we describe the internal experience of being rational?
Okay, let me give you an example. There are two ways to explain something. I could say, Ollie has food poisoning because he ate a dodgy piece of sushi last night.
Oh, I had a dodgy piece of pizza the other month, and oh no, don't remind me of it.
Okay, well, we'll stick with sushi because that will not bring back bad memories. The thing about that explanation is that it's what we call cause and effect. The dodgy sushi was the cause, and the food poisoning was the effect. And that is how the naturalist views the world. Because everything, absolutely everything, is explained in terms of cause and effect. So all biology gets explained by chemistry, all chemistry gets explained by physics. So in the end, everything gets explained in terms of atoms banging into other atoms. But now suppose you heard me saying, Ollie has food poisoning because he has assumed the fetal position on the floor and is groaning loudly while holding his stomach. Right? This time I'm making a logical inference. Okay, I'm making a logical argument. I mean, a simpler example, but not as much fun, would be if I say, I see smoke and I conclude that there is fire. My belief is grounded in the logical inference: where there's smoke, there's fire. So what I'm trying to do here is distinguish between two types of explanation. The dodgy sushi explanation is a cause and effect relation. The groaning on the floor explanation is a logical inference. Now, here's the point. If naturalism is true, if there is nothing to reality but cause and effect, then all we have is dodgy sushi. But that is not how we experience the world. Think of the moment in an Agatha Christie detective novel when suddenly all the clues click into place and you see who the murderer must be. There's an aha moment. Suddenly we see the truth. It has to be the way it happened, we say to ourselves, because logic has caused us to apprehend the truth. We now understand the thing. But all that mental experience has no place in the naturalist's world. So my argument here is that the experience of reasoning shows us that there must be more to reality than atoms banging into atoms. In the naturalist's world, there is only cause and effect. This caused that, which caused that, which caused that. But the world we experience is full of logical inferences, moments when we see the truth of a thing, and that is a signal to us that naturalism cannot be true.
Under naturalism, everything, including human thought, is the result of physical processes, neurons firing chemical reactions and evolutionary pressures. There's no purpose or intelligence guiding these processes. They're blind and non-rational.
That's right. So if my belief that 2 + 2 = 4, if it's just the result of atoms moving in my brain, shaped by survival advantages rather than truth-seeking, then it's a physical event, not a rational one. But we all know that we experience rational moments when the logic of something gives us that flash of insight, that experience of apprehending truth. For some people that might happen, when they're looking at an equation. But I'm conscious not everybody's like that. But think about the normal things of life. The moment when you see a micro expression on someone's face, and we can suddenly infer she is jealous of him, or he's scared. My point is, naturalism cannot explain our mental life. Now, we'll think about that more when we get to the episode on consciousness.
To close this episode, Jim, let's think about our third and final question. Is reason all we need to make judgments about God's existence?
Some philosophers like Immanuel Kant would have answered yes to that question. The Enlightenment elevated human reason to the level of God. They made human reason the ultimate source of knowledge. But that was not how the ancients thought. And I'm not just talking about early Christian thinkers. I'm talking about Greek philosophers like Plato. In the ancient world, reason was guided by the revelation of higher things. For Plato, there was the forms, his universals that were the perfect archetypes of the particular things we encounter on earth. But then for theists like Christians, the revelation was God himself. But in both cases, whether Platonic or Christian, the ancients saw a sort of three-step process going on. First, there was the vision of the ultimate, and that led, secondly, to a set of transcendental virtues, things like goodness and truth and beauty and love and justice. And then, thirdly, those transcendental virtues were applied to our earthly world. Now, all that stuff I've described was deemed to be the context in which reason should operate. In other words, when reason operated outside of that context, when it wasn't oriented towards truth, beauty, and goodness, it was still potent, but it was said to have lost its bearings. So reason that had been uncoupled from its lodestar, if you like, could mislead as well as lead.
And that's a really important point, Jim, because while we use reasoning, we don't place our ultimate trust in it. We have other capacities as well as rationality. We can discern beauty, goodness, and truth because they've been revealed to us.
Yes, well, that is the claim made by theists, and the point that all we can say at this stage is there is nothing irrational in the claim that God may have revealed truth to us. Now, it will take us quite a few episodes before we get to examine that claim. But for now, I just wanted to raise the possibility that reason, if it is untethered from goodness and beauty, might mislead us. We might be deceived by it. And that brings me back to The Man Who Never Was, the film I talked about at the start. See, when the Germans inspected his body, they pieced together all the evidence. They used logical reasoning to deduce that the Allies were going to attack Greece. But they were deceived by a cunning enemy. It wasn't until the war was over that the true identity of that drowned man was revealed. I just wanted to close by suggesting, in all gentleness, that those who believe in naturalism and unguided evolution may have been deceived by a cunning enemy. They've grabbed plausible evidence and made logical inferences, just as the Germans did with Captain Martin. But the whole scheme might be a deception. Now, at this point in the season, all I can ask is that that possibility be admitted. Kind-hearted atheists, in my experience, really do believe that I have been deceived. But that possibility cuts both ways, doesn't it? So I hope we've done enough in this episode to show that the theistic explanation for rationality is more plausible than the naturalist's answer. So it's possible, just possible, that they have been deceived.
Thank you, Jim. Next week, we're going to consider the cosmological argument, which examines the origin of the universe. But before that, you'd like us to close with a piece of music, wouldn't you?
I do. It's a complete self-indulgence, but it's from the soundtrack of the more recent film about the man who never was. Now, I've absolutely no reason for playing this, except that it's dignified and a little bit sad. But I thought it might prompt our listeners to consider the possibility that they have been deceived.